Millionaire mocked Black Maid's son with a chess game. Then he crushed everyone. Comment from which city you're watching and hit the subscribe button. The chandelier light glared down on polished marble floors, reflecting wealth so blinding it almost felt untouchable. Laughter echoed through the grand hall, sharp and cutting, as a billionaire leaned back in his leather chair, smirking at the trembling boy standing before him. The boy's name was Khalil Bennett. 11 years old, quiet, reserved, the son of a maid who had scrubbed these same floors for years without ever being noticed. His mother, Rosa Bennett, kept her head down, never daring to meet her employer's eyes. To them, she was invisible. To her son, she was everything. Tonight, however, the millionaire and his guests noticed her, but not for who she was. They noticed her because they wanted to laugh. "Why don't we give the maid's son a chance?" the host sneered, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Let's see if he can handle a game of chess." The guests chuckled. Some shook their heads, others leaned forward, ready for entertainment. To them, this was sport, mocking a child for amusement. Rosa's face burned red as she whispered, "Khalil, you don't have to." But her son stepped forward, his small hands tightening into fists before loosening again. He didn't speak. He simply sat across from the millionaire at the chessboard, his eyes steady. The room fell into a hush. They were expecting failure. They were expecting a joke. But there was something in Khalil's gaze that unsettled even the confident man across from him. Pieces clinked as the game began. The millionaire made his first move lazily, already grinning at what he thought would be an easy victory. Khalil didn't blink. He reached forward and answered with a precision that seemed almost instinctive. One move, then another. His hands moved like they had been waiting for this moment his entire life. Whispers stirred among the guests. What started as smug laughter began to fade into silence. Eyes widened. Rosa clutched her apron, her heart pounding louder than the sound of the ticking clock on the wall. She didn't know every detail of the game, but she knew this. Her son wasn't just playing, he was fighting. The millionaire's smirk faltered. His fingers hovered above the next piece, hesitating. His confidence cracked as Khalil's moves cornered him, fast, clean, merciless. Within minutes, the powerful man who thought this would be a joke was sweating beneath the bright chandelier. The boy who was mocked was no longer invisible. But the question now hung heavy in the air, unspoken but undeniable. How far would Khalil go to prove his genius, and what would the powerful do once their arrogance was shattered? Khalil Bennett's world was small, but inside it, his imagination stretched wider than the universe. Their apartment on the edge of the city was one bedroom, cramped and drafty in winter, but it carried warmth Rosa poured into it daily. The scent of her cooking, beans, rice, or whatever she could afford after long shifts, filled the room like a comfort blanket. Rosa had been working for the wealthy Harlow family for nearly 7 years. She woke at dawn, scrubbed floors until her knees ached, polished silver until it gleamed, and served dishes so lavish they felt like they belonged in another dimension. Yet when she returned home, she was never bitter. Her smiles for Khalil were real, her laughter genuine, even when exhaustion lined her eyes. Khalil adored her for that. To him, Rosa wasn't just a mother. She was a fighter, and she was the only one who noticed the fire in his mind. From the age of 6, Khalil had an odd obsession: chess. Rosa remembered the first time he saw a board. It wasn't theirs. They could never afford such a luxury. But one left behind in the laundry room of their building. The boy had studied it like a map to treasure. She thought it was a passing fancy. Then he began drawing boards on scraps of paper, cutting bottle caps into pieces, and memorizing moves from borrowed library books. By 10, he was solving chess puzzles meant for adults in minutes. By 11, he could anticipate not just the next move, but the next 10. But brilliance in their world was both a gift and a curse. At school, Khalil's teachers often dismissed him as distracted when he doodled chess patterns in his notebooks. Classmates teased him, calling him weird or nerdy, mocking his patched clothes. When Rosa tried to advocate for him, one teacher smiled thinly and said, "Children like him need to focus on practical things, not games they'll never use." It wasn't just dismissal. It was a quiet prejudice, the kind that cut deeper than words. Rosa would hold Khalil close at night, whispering, "Don't you listen to them, baby. Your mind is a gift. One day the world will see it." But deep down, she feared the world would try to crush it. Khalil, though, never let their cruelty dim his fire. He practiced on every surface, on napkins, on notebook margins, even with salt and pepper shakers when they sat at diners. Rosa would watch, her heart swelling with pride, even as she worried about what lay ahead. And then came the invitation. The Harlows were hosting one of their infamous gatherings. Wealthy friends from across the city would fill the mansion with designer gowns, tailored suits, and arrogant laughter. Rosa had worked dozens of these events before, unseen and unheard, her hands serving drinks while her presence faded into the background. But this time was different. This time, she had to bring Khalil. Their usual babysitter had fallen ill, and Rosa couldn't leave her son alone. Hesitantly, she asked the Harlows if he could sit quietly in the servants' quarters while she worked. They agreed, almost absent-mindedly. To them, what did it matter? He was just the maid's boy. Khalil's eyes lit up at the idea. Not because he cared for the glitz or the mansion. He had seen bits of it before when Rosa took him to work briefly. What intrigued him was the rumor he'd overheard. The Harlows owned a grand chess set, carved from ivory and ebony, displayed in their hall like art. Khalil's hands itched at the thought of touching those pieces, of seeing the board not as scratches on paper, but in its full glory. Rosa warned him sternly before they left. "You sit quiet, Khalil. You don't draw attention to yourself. These people, they don't see us the way they see themselves." But fate had already decided otherwise. That night would not be one of silence. That night, the boy, they thought, invisible, would be dragged into the light, not with kindness, but with ridicule. And neither Rosa nor Khalil knew it yet, but the humiliation waiting in that glittering mansion would test everything they had ever believed about dignity, courage, and the power of a mind no one could cage. The game had not yet begun, but the pieces were already moving. The Harlow mansion was alive with the hum of wealth. Crystal glasses clinked, violins played softly in the background, and the air was thick with perfume and power. Rosa slipped through the crowd, tray in hand, her eyes lowered as she wove between silk gowns and tailored suits. Khalil sat quietly near the corner of the hall, just as his mother had instructed. From where he sat, he could see the towering ivory and ebony chess set displayed like a jewel in glass. His heart raced, just looking at it. He traced moves in his mind, imagining himself at the board, while the laughter of the rich swelled around him. But quiet doesn't last long in rooms built on arrogance. A group of wealthy guests noticed him. Their eyes narrowed, whispers spreading like wildfire. One of them, a man with slicked back hair and a cruel grin, muttered loud enough for Rosa to hear, "Did the maid bring her boy as entertainment?" Laughter followed. Rosa's hands trembled on the tray, but she kept moving, kept silent. Khalil pretended not to hear, but his cheeks burned. The evening dragged on. He tried to disappear into the shadows, but fate has a way of dragging the powerless into the light. Near midnight, a conversation turned toward the grand chess set. "Ah, the masterpiece," the host boomed proudly, gesturing toward the glass case. "Carved in Italy, worth more than most of your houses." The guests chuckled at the excess. One woman teased, "But what good is it if no one ever plays?" That's when it happened. The cruel man spotted Khalil and sneered. Why not let the maid's boy try? It would be amusing. The suggestion landed like poison. Some laughed. Others smirked, already imagining the humiliation. Rosa froze where she stood, her heart sinking. She shook her head subtly at her son, silently pleading, "Don't do this." But Khalil's gaze locked on the board. His pulse pounded in his ears. All the years of practice, all the nights on paper boards and bottle caps, had led to this unthinkable moment. He wasn't being invited with kindness. He was being mocked. Yet something deep inside him whispered, "This is your chance." The glass case was opened. The millionaire himself took a seat at the board, smug and certain. Guests crowded around. murmuring eagerly, their eyes gleaming with expectation of a spectacle. Khalil was ushered forward, their laughter stinging with every step. Rosa whispered as he passed, her voice trembling. "Khalil, you don't owe them this." But the boy sat down anyway. His hands shook as he touched the pieces for the first time. The weight of the Ivory King in his hand sent a surge through him, real, solid, nothing like the bottle caps at home. He looked up. Across from him sat not just a man, but every sneer, every dismissal, every time the world said he didn't belong. The millionaire made his first move casually, without thought, a pawn forward. Laughter rang out. Khalil studied the board in silence. Then, with calm precision, he answered. A ripple moved through the crowd. The laughter softened. The boy's confidence unsettled them. Move after move, the board transformed into a battlefield. Khalil's face was steady, his eyes sharp. The millionaire leaned forward, no longer smiling. Sweat pricked at his temple. Each of Khalil's moves was a dagger, slicing through arrogance with elegance. The guests' amusement faltered. They exchanged uneasy glances. The game tightened. The millionaire's queen was trapped, his rook cornered. Khalil moved without hesitation, as though the game had already been played in his mind. Rosa clutched her apron, her lips moving in silent prayer. The boy she'd tried to protect from cruelty was standing against it head-on, and then it happened. Khalil's knight leapt across the board, cornering the king. Gasps erupted. The room went silent. Checkmate was inevitable. The millionaire stared at the board, frozen, his arrogance shattered. Around him, the crowd buzzed, shocked, confused, unsettled. This was not the humiliation they had planned. It was their own. And Khalil? He sat back in his chair, his chest rising and falling. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply whispered two words that cut through the silence like thunder. Your move. But there was none left to make. The room was a cathedral of silence. The only sound was the faint tick of the grandfather clock in the corner and the uneven breaths of the man who thought he couldn't lose. The millionaire's hand hovered above the board, trembling now, the arrogance drained from his face. He searched for an escape, but the truth glared back at him from the grid of black and white. His king was trapped. His empire of pawns and rooks lay in ruins. And opposite him sat an 11-year-old boy, the son of the Maid, calm, unshaken, merciless. Gasps rippled across the hall. Some guests whispered, stunned. Others shifted uncomfortably, their laughter turned into tight, uneasy silence. Rosa stood frozen in the corner, her hand pressed to her chest. Her boy, the same boy who drew chessboards on scraps of paper at their tiny kitchen table, who practiced with bottle caps while the world mocked him, was now dismantling the pride of men who thought him invisible. The millionaire slammed his palm on the table. "This is a trick," he barked, his voice cracking under the weight of humiliation. "No boy could play like this." But Khalil didn't flinch. He leaned forward, his voice steady, his words cutting through the air like glass. "It's not a trick. It's skill. You thought I was a joke. But the only joke here is you." The words hit harder than the checkmate itself. Guests recoiled as though struck. The millionaire's face turned red, his fists clenched, but the board betrayed him. There was no move left to make. Checkmate was complete. His defeat wasn't just in the game, it was in the collapse of his power, his pride shredded before the very people he sought to impress. Khalil pushed his chair back slowly, the ivory knight still standing tall on the board, sealing the final blow. He stood, his small frame carrying the weight of a giant. For the first time in his life, he wasn't just Rosa's son. He wasn't the maid's boy. He was Khalil Bennett, and the room knew it. But silence can be dangerous. And as Khalil stepped away from the table, Rosa noticed it. Not everyone was humbled. Some guests wore masks of shame, but others glared, with cold hatred. Arrogance wounded is arrogance that festers. And Rosa's heart pounded with a new fear. What would these people do now that their power had been mocked by a child? She hurried to her son, wrapping an arm around him, her voice a whisper trembling with pride and warning. "You've won, Khalil, but stay close. The real game isn't over yet." The chandelier above flickered, the air heavy with tension. The boy had claimed victory, but in doing so, he had challenged more than just a man. He had challenged a world built on cruelty, and that world wasn't ready to surrender. The silence after Khalil's checkmate lingered like a storm before it breaks. Rosa's arm tightened around her son, shielding him instinctively, as if the polished marble floors and glittering chandeliers could suddenly collapse under the weight of pride wounded in public. The millionaire sat frozen, his hand still on the board, his lips quivering with words he couldn't form. The smirk that had once commanded the room was gone, stripped away by the brilliance of a boy the world had deemed invisible. Then a sound rose from the back of the hall, soft, hesitant claps that echoed in the uneasy quiet. A woman in a silver gown stood, her eyes glistening with admiration. She clapped again, louder this time, her voice trembling as she whispered, "Bravo!" Others followed. Slowly, reluctantly, like a tide they couldn't resist, guests began to applaud. Not all of them. Some remained stiff, their pride too, brittle to bend. But enough that the hall filled with a rising wave of recognition. Khalil looked up at his mother, unsure if he should smile, but Rosa only nodded, her eyes wet. "Take your bow, baby. You've earned it." He turned, bowing shyly to the crowd. For the first time, they weren't laughing. They weren't mocking. They were seeing him. But recognition in a room like that came at a price. The millionaire stood abruptly, his chair screeching across the marble. His face burned red, his fists clenched so tightly that veins bulged across his knuckles. "Enough of this charade," he bellowed. "He's just a boy, a maid's boy. Do you all not see?" The applause faltered. Some guests glanced nervously at each other. Others looked away. It was clear. Old prejudice still clung to the walls of this hall like smoke that refused to clear. But Khalil didn't shrink. He turned back to the board, reached out, and gently placed the fallen king in the millionaire's direction. His voice, though soft, carried through the silence. "A king's title means nothing if he can't defend his crown." The words landed like thunder. Rosa's breath caught. She had never seen her son so fearless, so sure of himself. That moment, the boy standing tall against the man who tried to belittle him, burned itself into the memory of every witness in the room. Some would never forget it. Others would try desperately to erase it. In the weeks that followed, whispers of the incident spread like wildfire beyond the mansion walls. Stories drifted through neighborhoods, across newspapers, into online chatter. Some dismissed it as exaggeration, but others clung to the truth. A maid's son had humiliated a millionaire at his own game. Invitations began arriving. Chess clubs, schools, even universities wanted to see the boy play. Rosa, still working her long hours, found herself overwhelmed, but every letter carried the same message. This boy has talent the world cannot ignore. But with the recognition came shadow. Not everyone celebrated. Some muttered that it was impossible that Rosa must have hired someone to play for him. Others sneered at the thought of a black child being called a prodigy. Through it all, Khalil remained steady. He practiced at night with a board worn smooth by his hands, his mother by his side, reminding him, "Your gift is not for them to approve. It is for you to live." Years passed, and Khalil's name grew. He entered tournaments, first local, then national. Cameras flashed in his face, magazines printed his photo, and slowly, people stopped calling him the maid's son. They called him what he truly was, a champion. Rosa watched with quiet pride, her hands always working, her eyes always following her boy. She never sought the spotlight, never claimed credit. But Khalil never forgot who had been there when no one else believed. Every victory, every trophy, he placed in her hands first. And the millionaire? He disappeared from the headlines, his pride shattered. Some say he tried to rebuild his reputation. Others whispered he never recovered from that night. But the truth was clear. The boy he mocked had built a legacy stronger than his fortune.